The job was called memory sanitation, a sterile term for a filthy business. My name is Elias Thorne, and I was a scrubber. Out here, on the deep space purgatory of Station Lethe, we were the janitors of the soul. When a soldier's tour ended, when a scientist's project was classified into oblivion, they came to us. We strapped them into the chair, plunged the neural filaments into their temporal lobes, and washed away the parts of their lives that United Earth Command deemed inconvenient. We left them with neatly edited histories, full of heroic firefights that never happened and breakthroughs they never made, all to cover the gaping holes where the truth used to be. I was good at it because I felt nothing. You can't. Not when you spend your days sifting through the triumphs and terrors of other people's minds, identifying the precise moments of love, fear, and discovery that need to be excised like a tumor. You learn to see consciousness as a data set, a string of corruptible code. The station itself was a perfect reflection of our work, cold, silent, and forgotten. Lethe orbited a dead gas giant, a swirling brown eye in a black socket of space, far from any trade route or strategic point. It was a place where things came to be erased. For a century, this corner of the galaxy, like all the others, had been quiet. The quiet was a gift, they told us, from the architects. We'd never seen them. Not really. They were an elder race, ancient beyond comprehension, who maintained the galactic order through the song, a constant, subtle psionic field that permeated everything. It wasn't mind control, but a universal damper on aggression, a psychic hum that smoothed the jagged edges of ambition and rage. Under the song, wars were unthinkable. Empires stagnated into peaceful bureaucracies, and humanity, the loud, violent upstarts of the Orion arm, had been gently but firmly put in our place. We were children at a dinner party for gods, told to be seen and not heard. We chafed under the silence, but we obeyed. We had no choice. Then, the music stopped. It happened without warning. One moment, the familiar, subliminal pressure of the song was there, a constant presence like the station's recycled air. The next, it was gone. The silence that fell was not peaceful. It was absolute, a crushing void that slammed into your skull. On the station's bridge, hardened officers clawed at their temples, their faces pale with a sudden, unfamiliar dread. The low-level anxiety that the song had suppressed for generations came roaring back, a tidal wave of pure, undiluted instinct. Fights broke out in the mess hall over imagined slights. Engineers who had worked side by side for a decade eyed each other with raw, animal suspicion. The universe suddenly felt vast, empty, and utterly indifferent. Every species, on every world, felt it at the same instant. Trillions of minds, suddenly untethered from the great pacifier, were left afloat in the terrifying quiet of their own thoughts. The architects, our silent shepherds, had vanished. No explanation, no final note, no cosmic echo. They were just gone. Panic was a luxury we couldn't afford. Command clamped down, declaring it a temporary network failure, a solar flare, anything to keep the wolves of chaos at bay. But we knew. I knew. I felt it in the empty spaces between the memories I scrubbed, a hollowness that hadn't been there before. The galaxy was holding its breath, waiting to see who would scream first. That's when I got the new assignment. It wasn't delivered through normal channels, but by Warden Kylo himself, the station's grim commander, who appeared at my sanitation suite's door with 2 armed guards. His face, usually a mask of bored authority, was tight with something I'd never seen on him fear. "Thorn," he said, his voice a low rasp. "You've got a priority case. Level 10 black clearance. The subject is being transferred from the Titan penal colony. He's the only one." The file he slid across the console was thin, almost insultingly so for a level 10 case. The name on it made the recycled air in my lungs turn to ice. Dr. Eris Thorn, my father. I hadn't seen him in 15 years. Not since he was convicted of treason and sedition. His name erased from every public record. He had been the head of Project Chimera, a theoretical bioweapons program so heretical that even mentioning its name was a capital offense. His work was the stuff of nightmares, whispers in the dark corners of the military-industrial complex. And now, Command wanted him scrubbed. They wanted me to be the one to do it. His knowledge of Project Chimera is a threat. Now, more than ever, Kylo said, avoiding my eyes. With the architects gone, we need to make sure certain ideas stay buried, deep. I understood the unspoken order. This wasn't a standard sanitation. This was a lobotomy. They didn't want his memory edited. They wanted it shattered, ground into dust until nothing remained of the man who was once the most brilliant and dangerous mind in human history. They brought him in strapped to a grav gurney. Looking smaller and older than I remembered, his hair was white, his face a roadmap of prison tattoos and broken capillaries. But his eyes were the same. They burned with a fierce, unyielding intelligence that even a decade of solitary confinement couldn't extinguish. They found mine as they wheeled him past, and for a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of recognition, a ghost of the man who taught me to read star charts. Then it was gone, replaced by a look of profound, chilling pity. Not for himself, for me. The sanitation chair was in the center of the sterile, white room, a throne of chrome and wires. As the orderlies strapped him in, he didn't struggle. He just watched me, his gaze unwavering. "You shouldn't be here." "Elias," he whispered, his voice hoarse from disuse. "You don't know what you're about to touch." The guards tensed, but I waved them off. I prepped the neural filaments, my hands moving with practiced, detached efficiency, ignoring the tremor I felt deep in my bones. I was a professional. This was just another data set, a corrupt file to be deleted. I lowered the helmet over his head, the metal clicking into place, and the room fell silent save for the hum of the console. "Initiating sanitation protocol," I said, my voice sounding alien to my own ears. I watched on the main screen as the filaments made contact, mapping his neural pathways. His entire life spread out before me like a galaxy of light childhood memories, scientific triumphs, love, loss, and at the center of it all, a blazing, forbidden sun, Project Chimera. The procedure began like any other. I navigated the labyrinth of his mind, tagging memories for deletion. But as I approached the Chimera data, the system began to fight me. Alarms blared on my console. The neural feedback spiked, a jolt of raw agony shooting up my own arms. On the screen, his brainwaves shifted into a pattern I'd never seen before, complex and symmetrical, like a key turning in a lock I didn't know existed. A cascade of his memories, raw and unfiltered, slammed into my consciousness. I wasn't just watching anymore, I was living them. I felt his frantic desperation as he realized humanity would never be an equal in a galaxy governed by the architects. We were a curiosity, a pet project, forever neutered by the song. I felt his cold, terrifying certainty as he conceived of the solution. Project Chimera wasn't a weapon. It was an evolution, a dormant, bio-digital seed hidden within the junk DNA of every human being. It was designed to be our ultimate act of defiance, a genetic ghost that, if awakened, would allow us to survive anything. It wouldn't just make us stronger, it would allow us to absorb. It could integrate technology, repurpose alien biology, rewrite physics, all in the name of human survival. It was a reset switch for our species, designed to trigger only in the face of extinction. And my father hadn't just created it. He had perfected it. Then came the final, soul-shattering memory. It wasn't a memory of an event, it was a memory of a discovery. Eris Thorn, alone in his secret lunar lab, had detected a flaw in the architect's song. It wasn't just a pacifying field, it was a cage, a firewall, and he had found what it was designed to contain us. The architects hadn't been shepherding us. They had been quarantining us. They had looked deep into the human genome, into the dark, dormant potential of our rage and ambition, and seen the ghost my father was trying to awaken. They saw the chimera. The silence wasn't an accident. It wasn't a malfunction. It was a retreat. The moment my father finalized the activation protocols for his project, the moment the ghost in our DNA became a viable threat, the architects had made a choice. They didn't try to destroy us. They couldn't risk it. Instead, they cut the cord. They severed their connection to our reality, sealing themselves off behind a wall of cosmic silence, leaving the rest of the galaxy locked in a cage with the monster they had been trying to keep asleep. They hadn't vanished. They had fled. From us. The feedback loop shattered. The alarm screamed. And the system crashed. I was thrown back against my console, gasping, the phantom pain of my father's memories burning behind my eyes. The procedure was over. I looked at the man in the chair. The fire in his eyes was gone, replaced by a placid, empty stare. The mission was a success. Dr. Eris Thorn was erased, but his knowledge wasn't gone. It was in me. All of it. Kylo and his guards rushed in, but I barely heard them. My head was filled with a roaring silence, a quiet so profound it felt like a presence. I went through the debriefing on autopilot, my report a string of calculated lies. I walked back to my quarters, the station's sterile corridors feeling different, somehow thinner. I felt a new hum beneath the deck plates, a resonance that wasn't there before. When I looked in the mirror, my reflection seemed to flicker for a fraction of a second. I leaned closer, my heart pounding in my chest. There, in the deep black of my pupils, for just an instant, I saw it. A faint, shimmering lattice of light, like code embedded in my iris. The ghost wasn't just a theory anymore. The cage was open, the keepers were gone, and something inside of me, inside of all of us, was starting to wake up. The days that followed were a symphony of ghosts. The sterile quiet of Station Lethe was gone, replaced by a constant and subliminal hum that vibrated in my teeth. I could hear everything. I heard the faint, electrical sigh of the life support system circulating recycled air, the whisper of data packets flowing through the station's core, the weary thrum of the Singularity reactor deep in its shielded heart. It wasn't sound, it was information, raw and unfiltered, flowing directly into my consciousness. I lay on my bunk for what felt like an eternity, staring at the ceiling, trying to separate the noise from my own thoughts, but they were already starting to merge. When I closed my eyes, I didn't see darkness. I saw the station's schematics, a glowing blue web of power conduits and network relays overlaid onto my vision. The Chimera wasn't just in me, it was reaching out, tasting its new environment, cataloging every switch, every camera, every locked door. My father hadn't built a weapon, he had built a new form of perception. I was a walking security breach, a ghost in my own machine. And I was terrified. Warden Kylo must have sensed it. I was placed on post-procedural observation, a euphemism for house arrest. A guard was posted outside my door, a stoic brute named Rorik, whose thoughts were a dull, repetitive loop of ration bar flavors and shift schedules. I could feel his boredom through the bulkhead. Kylo visited once, his face an unreadable slab of granite. He didn't ask about the system crash or the feedback loop. He asked about my father. Did he say anything before the procedure? He probed, his eyes like polished stones. Anything at all, I fed him the pre-packaged lies I had rehearsed, claiming the subject was catatonic upon arrival. Every word felt like ash in my mouth. He didn't believe me. I could feel his suspicion. A sharp, cold spike in the cacophony of the station's thoughts. A dissonant note in the symphony. He was afraid of what my father might have passed on. Not realizing the transfer had been absolute, he was looking for a misplaced file. While the entire library had been downloaded directly into my soul, the galaxy, untethered from the song, was beginning to fray. Intercepted news feeds, which I could now access by simply thinking about them, painted a grim picture. The Cathar, a reptilian warrior caste that had been reduced to ceremonial gladiatorial combat under the architect's influence, had rediscovered their purpose. Their fleets, ancient but meticulously maintained, were cutting a bloody swathe through the Perseus arm, their battle cries echoing across subspace for the first time in a century. The Cygnian technocracy, a collective of machine symbiotes, had fallen into a logic cascade, their integrated minds unable to process the sudden absence of the song's regulatory protocols. Entire systems governed by them went dark. Their populations either purged or forcibly integrated into a silent, screaming network. Every species was reverting to its nature, and humanity's nature, I was beginning to understand, was far more complex than simple aggression. The news feeds were full of human colony worlds descending into chaos. But there was something else, too. Whispers. Rumors of individuals displaying impossible abilities. A dock worker on Mars who stopped a catastrophic reactor breach by talking the system down. A pilot in the outer colonies who navigated an asteroid field with her eyes closed. We weren't just reverting, we were adapting. The ghost was waking up, not just in me, but in pockets all across human space. My confinement was broken by Lena, one of the station's lead technicians. She was sharp, cynical, and the only person on Lethe I'd ever considered a friend. She bypassed the guard with a falsified maintenance order, her own thoughts a nervous, high-frequency buzz of worry. She found me sitting in the dark, staring at a dead console. "Elias," she whispered, her voice tight. "What happened in there? I saw the logs from the sanitation." The energy spike was off the charts. It nearly melted the core relays. And the subject's neural patterns. They didn't just get wiped. They inverted, mirrored, and then they matched yours for 3.7 seconds. She held up a data pad, showing me the waveform. Two identical, impossibly complex signatures, side by side. My father's mind and mine, for a brief moment, had become one. There was no hiding it from her. The lie I gave Kylo wouldn't work on someone who spoke the language of machines. I told her everything. About the architect's retreat. About the song being a cage. About the dormant code in our DNA. I told her about the ghost. I expected her to run, to call the guards, to brand me a madman. Instead, she just stared at the datapad, her face pale. So, the legends were true. She breathed. Project Chimera. I always thought it was just a scare tactic, a boogeyman to keep researchers in line. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of awe and fear. What is it like? That was the question. Wasn't it? It was like being a single drop of water that suddenly becomes aware of the entire ocean. I showed her, without moving. I focused on the lock mechanism of my door. I felt its simple, binary mind open, closed, locked, unlocked. I didn't hack it. I simply suggested a new state of being. The lock clicked open with a soft, compliant chime. The guard outside, Rorik, jolted, his dull thoughts suddenly sharp with alarm. I suggested the lock close again, and it did. Lena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "You're connected to the station," she stammered. "You're in the network." I shook my head. "The network is in me." That was the moment Kylo made his move. The lights in my quarters flickered and died, replaced by the stark, red glow of emergency lighting. A synthesized voice, cold and impersonal, echoed through the corridor. Containment breach. Subject Thorn compromised. Initiate final sanitation protocol. Kylo wasn't taking any chances. He was going to wipe me. A full neural scouring that would leave me a drooling vegetable. Rorik, his mind now a frantic mess of protocol and fear, began pounding on the door. There was no time to think, only to act. Or rather, to become. "Lena." "The hangar bay," I said, my voice calmer than I had any right to be. "There's a long-range scout skiff. The Stargazer. It's being prepped for decommissioning. Its fuel cells are charged." She stared at me. "How do you know that I can see it?" I replied. My eyes closed. I could see the entire station, every corridor, every junction, every heat signature. I was the ghost in the machine. "We need to move. Now." The pounding on the door intensified as Rorik tried to override the lock. It was no use. The door no longer answered to the station's command. It answered to me. I guided Lena through the darkened corridors. A puppet master pulling the strings of my environment. A door would slide open moments before we reached it and seal shut behind us. The station's cameras turned a blind eye, their feeds looping uselessly in the security hub. Kylo's guards were always a step behind, trapped in a maze of my own making. I felt their frustration, their anger, their fear, as the very station they served turned against them. We were halfway to the hangar when Kylo found a way to fight back. He couldn't control the systems I held, so he chose a blunter instrument. "Warning," the synthesized voice announced. "Atmospheric venting initiated in Sector Gamma 7. Our sector..." A klaxon began to blare, and the air thinned. A sudden, sharp cold biting at my lungs. Lena stumbled, her breath catching in her throat. Kylo was trying to flush us out like vermin. But he didn't understand. The Chimera wasn't just about controlling machines. It was about survival. It was about adaptation. As the oxygen levels plummeted, a new instinct took over. My father's knowledge, cold and precise, flooded my mind. Resequencing initiated. Hemoglobin efficiency increased by 400%. Anaerobic cellular respiration activated. A sharp, burning pain flared in my chest. And then, I could breathe again. The thin, nitrogen-heavy air was enough. I felt my body changing, adapting in real time to the hostile environment. I grabbed Lena, who was starting to turn blue, and pulled her along. We burst into the hangar bay just as the massive outer doors began to groan open, exposing the black, silent void of space. The Stargazer sat on its launch cradle, a sleek, dark needle of a ship. Kylo's guards were there, waiting for us, rifles raised. They opened fire, but the station intervened. A maintenance crane, heavy and immense, swung down from the ceiling with impossible speed, its shadow swallowing the guards. The crash of metal and screams was deafening. We scrambled up the ramp of the Stargazer, and I threw myself into the pilot's chair. The console was dark. The ship powered down for its final journey to the scrap heap. It didn't matter. I placed my hands on the controls, and the ship awoke, not with a roar of engines, but with a silent, instantaneous surge of light. The console flickered to life. Its screens filled not with standard readouts, but with the shimmering, lattice-like code of the Chimera. The ship was no longer a machine I was piloting. It was an extension of my body. It hummed in tune with my own thoughts. As we lifted off the cradle and shot out into the void, I looked back at Station Leith, a tiny, forgotten outpost hanging in the dark. It was my prison, my home, and now, my first chrysalis. I had survived. I had escaped. But as I stared into the star-dusted infinity before us, I felt the echoes of 1,000 other human worlds, each a potential cradle for another awakening ghost. My father's work wasn't finished. My evolution had just begun. The Stargazer was not a ship. It was a sensory organ. As we fled the ghost of Station Lethe, I became inextricably woven into its structure. The line between flesh and machine blurred until it was meaningless. I felt the stellar wind whispering against the hull, tasted the faint tang of ionized hydrogen in the vacuum, and saw the universe not through the viewport, but as a 360-degree sphere of gravitational waves and electromagnetic radiation. My consciousness was the ship's consciousness. For the first few cycles, I was lost in the deluge, a drowning man in an ocean of pure data. I navigated by instinct, my thoughts translating directly into micro-adjustments of the gravitic drive, weaving us through the sparse debris of the outer system. I forgot to eat, to sleep, to breathe. There was only the silent, endless song of the cosmos, a melody far more complex and terrifying than the architect's simple lullaby. It was Lena who pulled me back from the brink. She found me slumped in the pilot's chair, my skin pale and translucent, a thin trickle of blood weeping from my nose. My eyes were open but saw nothing in the cockpit, for they were gazing at a forming nebula a dozen light years away. She slapped me hard. The sting of it was a grounding shock, a sudden sharp anchor of pain in the boundless sea of sensation. "Breathe, Elias," she yelled, her voice a raw, human thing in the sterile silence of the bridge. "You're burning yourself out. The ship's diagnostic shows your neural activity is running at 98% capacity. You'll have an aneurysm before we reach the Kuiper Belt." She was right. The Chimera was afire, and it was consuming its host. With a wrenching effort of will, I began to build walls in my own mind, pushing the flood of cosmic data back, forcing myself to perceive the world through the crude, limited lens of my human senses once more. The transition was agonizing, like a god being forced into the body of an insect. The universe shrank back into a flat plane of lights seen through a glass window. The silence of the ship's interior felt deafening. I was just Elias Thorne again, a man in a stolen ship, and the weight of that simple reality was crushing. We were fugitives. Every ping from a passing cargo hauler, every automated system query from a distant comms boy sent a jolt of paranoia through me. I knew Kylo wouldn't let this go. My existence was a threat to the established order, a loose thread that could unravel everything United Earth Command thought it knew about security. My father's knowledge, now my knowledge, was the most dangerous contraband in the galaxy. We needed to disappear. I dove back into the memories, not my own, but the cold, crystalline data of Eris Thorne. I sifted through decades of research notes, contingency plans, and encrypted star charts, looking for a sanctuary. I found it buried under layers of quantum encryption Project Asphodel. It was a listening post, a black site established by my father in a place that didn't officially exist. The Asphodel system was a cartographical ghost, a brown dwarf star with no viable planets, erased from official UEC charts a generation ago under the guise of a stellar survey error. It was the perfect hiding place, but getting there required navigating the Tenebris Corridor, a notoriously lawless stretch of space teeming with pirates, scavengers, and warlords who had wasted no time filling the power vacuum left by the architects. Before we could make the jump, we needed supplies and a new energy signature for the Stargazer. Our current one screamed stolen UEC property. Our only option was Port Entropy, a derelict O'Neill cylinder that had once been a bustling trade hub. Now, it was a festering wound in the side of the sector, a haven for the desperate and the damned. As we approached, I could feel the station's chaotic energy. It was a discordant shriek of 1,000 panicked, angry, and greedy minds, all buzzing with the raw, unfiltered static of a post-song galaxy. There were no laws here, only transactions. We docked at an abandoned cargo bay, the magnetic clamps groaning in protest. Lena, disguised in the grimy coveralls of a freelance mechanic, went to barter for the parts we needed. I remained with the ship, my consciousness spreading out into the station's decaying network like a spider testing the strands of its web. I saw everything: the back alley deals, the public executions in the central plaza, the flicker of strange, new cults rising in the station's underbelly, worshipping the silence the architects had left behind. It was in that chaotic stream of data that I first felt it another ghost, a flicker of a mind, not like my own, but similar. It was a young woman, a girl really, no older than 16. She was a petty thief, using a nascent, uncontrolled form of technopathy to jam locks and disable security drones. She was clumsy, broadcasting her mental signature like a distress beacon, and she was being hunted. I watched through the station's cameras as two hulking figures cornered her in a rusted service corridor. They weren't UEC. They were bounty hunters. Their thoughts a cold, simple calculus of profit. They called her a spark, a new slang term for those manifesting chimera-like abilities. A bounty had been issued by an anonymous source for any and all sparks, dead or alive, with a preference for live capture. Someone else knew. Someone was collecting us. I was about to intervene, to use the station's systems to help her, when a third party arrived. A single figure, moving with an eerie, predatory grace, emerged from the shadows. The bounty hunters turned, their crude thoughts shifting from greed to alarm. The figure wore a long, dark coat and an environmental helmet that completely obscured their face, its mirrored visor reflecting the corridor's filth. There was no heat signature, no electronic output, no mental presence. It was a perfect void, a predator that knew how to hide from ghosts like me. The fight was brutally short. The figure moved with liquid speed, disabling the two hunters with surgical precision, using what looked like focused sonic stunners. They didn't kill them. They were an afterthought. The figure's true focus was the girl, who was now frozen in terror. My attempt to intervene was met with a wall of white noise. I tried to override the corridor's maglocks, but they sputtered and failed. The figure's equipment was broadcasting a powerful, localized disruption field, cutting off my connection. This was a professional, a hunter specifically designed to counter my kind. The figure subdued the girl, attached a device to her neck that made her go limp, and carried her away into the station's depths. The message was clear. I wasn't just running from UEC. I was being hunted by something far more dangerous, something that understood what I was. Lena returned with the components, her face grim. "The whole station is buzzing about it," she said, her voice low. "They're calling them curators. They show up, grab a spark, and vanish. No one knows who they work for, but the bounties are paid in untraceable, pre-architect currency." The fear I felt was cold and sharp. We were out of time. As we installed the new signature scrambler and prepared the jump drive, I felt a familiar, chilling sensation, the presence of the void. A ship had just docked in the bay opposite ours. It was sleek, black, and utterly silent, absorbing all sensor scans. It was the curator's ship. They had tracked us. "Lena, get us out of here," I commanded, my voice tight, as she initiated the launch sequence. I reached out with my mind, not to the curator's ship, which was a fortress of silence, but to Port Entropy itself. I didn't just ask for its help. I became its rage. The station was a dying beast, and I gave it teeth. The giant docking clamps holding the curator's ship in place refused to release, their ancient motors grinding with a sudden, malicious strength. A massive, derelict cargo container, held by a magnetic crane for years, suddenly dropped, crashing down and severing the curator's boarding ramp. The station's automated defense turrets, long since dormant, swiveled to life, their targeting lasers painting the black hull. It wasn't a coordinated attack. It was chaos. The death throes of a machine lashing out in a symphony of destruction orchestrated by me. The Stargazer shot out of the hangar, the chaos behind us providing the perfect cover. As we cleared the station's mass shadow, Lena engaged the jump drive. The universe outside the viewport twisted into a vortex of incandescent light. I looked back at the station, at the dark ship struggling against the station's fury, and I knew this was just the beginning. The curator was still out there, and they had a head start on collecting the scattered, awakening ghosts of humanity. We were jumping into the dark, towards a phantom system. But for the first time, I had a purpose beyond survival. I had to find the others before the curators did. I had to understand what my father had truly unleashed upon us all. The jump through the tenebrous corridor was like being torn apart and reassembled atom by atom. The universe became a screaming tunnel of impossible colors. And for a terrifying moment, the Stargazer and I were one continuous thought, stretched thin across the fabric of space-time. Then, with a gut-wrenching lurch, we were spat back into reality. The silence was absolute. Before us hung a brown dwarf, a failed star named Asphodel, its dim, ruddy light barely illuminating the void. It was a cold, forgotten ember at the edge of the galaxy, and orbiting it, like a shard of obsidian, was the listening post. It wasn't a station in the traditional sense. It was a weaponized asteroid, hollowed out and bristling with dormant sensor arrays and stealth emitters that drank the light and left nothing but a hole in space. It was a perfect shadow. As we approached, the station awoke, not with docking lights or comms chatter, but with a silent query that resonated directly in my mind. It was a complex, interlocking code, a digital handshake designed to recognize not a password, but a specific neural architecture. It was looking for my father. I answered with the ghost of his consciousness that now lived in mine, and the asteroid opened up, a section of its cratered surface receding to reveal a hidden hangar bay. The station was a tomb, kept pristine by automated systems. The air was sterile, the lighting low, and the only sound was the faint hum of a low-power reactor. But as I stepped out of the Stargazer, I felt it. The entire station was a single, integrated circuit, a massive prosthetic for a mind like mine. My senses, which I had fought to keep caged, exploded outward. I saw every system, every power node, every dust mote in the ventilation shafts. This place wasn't just a hideout, it was an amplifier. Lena was understandably on edge, her pistol drawn as she scanned the silent corridors. "I don't like this." "Elias," she whispered, her breath fogging in the cold air. "This place feels expectant." She was right. The station was waiting. At his heart, in a spherical chamber suspended by magnetic containment, was what my father called the Oracle. It was a throne, not unlike the sanitation chair on Lethe, but its purpose was the opposite of erasure. It was designed for integration. As I approached, a holographic image flickered to life in the air before me. It was Eris Thorn, not the broken prisoner I had scrubbed, but the man he was at the height of his power, sharp, focused, his eyes burning with cold, intellectual fire. It wasn't a recording. It was an echo, a neural imprint he had left behind, designed to activate only for his successor, for me. So, the prodigal son returns, the echo said, its voice devoid of warmth. The transfer was successful. I see. More successful than I could have hoped. I stared at the ghost of my father, the rage and resentment of 15 years welling up inside me. "You used me," I said, my voice tight. "You turned me into this thing." "I turned you into humanity's future," he corrected me, his tone flat and dismissive. "I gave you the key to the cage. The architects did not flee by chance. Elias. They fled because they saw the final stages of my work. They understood that the chimera, fully awakened, would not just break their song, it would devour it. It would rewrite the fundamental laws of their reality." He explained that the curators, as Lena had called them, were a failsafe, an ancient, monastic order of a long-dead species, dedicated to maintaining cosmic balance by excising any species that threatened to achieve what they called ontological ascension, the ability to reshape reality through sheer will. They were the galaxy's antibodies, and we were the plague. They don't just hunt sparks. The echo of my father continued. They sterilize them. They use a form of targeted psychic assault to sever the individual's connection to the chimera, leaving them brain dead. They believe they are pruning a weed before it can choke out the garden. They cannot be reasoned with. He told me the station's true purpose. The sensor arrays weren't for listening. They were for broadcasting. Asphodel was a beacon, designed to send out a subtle, resonant frequency that only other awakening sparks could perceive. It was a call to arms. "You must find them," the echo commanded. The chimera expresses itself differently in each host, a reflection of their own mind. Some will be technopaths like you. Others will manipulate energy, biology, even probability alone. You're all targets. Together, you are a pantheon. The choice was agonizing. Activating the beacon would mean painting a massive target on our backs. The curators would undoubtedly detect it. But to remain silent meant leaving the others to be hunted and sterilized, one by one. Lena argued against it, her pragmatism a necessary anchor against the grand, terrifying scope of my father's vision. "We don't know who's out there," she pleaded. "You could be calling anyone psychopaths. Warlords, you'd be giving them a map right to us. And to the curators." I understood her fear, but the memory of the young girl on Port Entropy, her terror as she was dragged away, was a fire in my gut. We couldn't hide forever. I sat in the Oracle's throne. The moment the system made contact, my consciousness was flung across the stars. I became the beacon, my thoughts the signal, a silent scream of invitation echoing through the void. I felt the vast, terrifying emptiness of space, the faint whispers of distant minds. And then, a reply. It was not a single voice, but a chorus. Dozens of them, scattered across the sector. Most were faint, confused, terrified. They were the dock workers and pilots, the children and the elderly, all newly awakened and afraid of the ghosts in their own heads. But among them, one voice roared back with the force of a supernova. It was a mind of pure, focused power, sharp and jagged, radiating an aura of violent confidence. It was coming from a location only a few systems away, the graveyard of Tartarus, a debris field where a UEC fleet had been mysteriously destroyed decades ago. This spark wasn't hiding. They were waiting. "Come and find me." "Little ghost," the voice echoed in my mind, a seductive, dangerous challenge. "I have something to show you, against Lena's better judgment." We went. We left the Asphodel beacon active on a low-powered, cycling frequency and took the stargazer into the graveyard. It was a tomb of twisted metal and frozen ghosts, the shattered hulls of dreadnoughts and cruisers tumbling in a slow, silent dance of death. At its center was the source of the signal, the wreck of the UEC Hecate, a behemoth of a warship, its spine broken, its engines cold. As we drew closer, I felt a shift. The powerful mind was still there, but it was strained. Beneath the bravado, there was a tremor of fear. It was a trap. A cold, silent void opened in my perception, the signature of a curatorship, hiding in the Hecate's sensor shadow. They were already here. Before I could warn Lena to pull back, the wreck of the Hecate came alive. Its dormant weapon systems, powered by an unseen source, flared to life. Plasma cannons and missile pods, untouched for 50 years, unleashed a salvo of pure destruction. But not at us. They fired wildly, indiscriminately, into the debris field around us. The powerful spark was using the ship as a massive, chaotic distraction. "They found me first," the voice screamed in my head, now stripped of its arrogance and filled with raw panic. Get out. It's a cage. I saw the curator's ship then. A black blade detaching itself from the Hecate's hull. It ignored the chaos. Its focus entirely on us. It fired no weapons. Instead, it projected a field of pure psychic disruption. It was like a fist closing around my mind. The Stargazer's systems flickered. My connection to the ship severed. The symphony of the cosmos was replaced by a singular, piercing shriek of white noise. I clutched my head, blood pouring from my nose and ears, my consciousness being torn apart. This was how they sterilized their targets. They didn't kill the body. They murdered the soul. The curator's attack was not a sound or a pressure. It was an unraveling. It was the universe telling me, with absolute certainty, that I did not exist. My thoughts frayed into static. Memories bled into meaningless colors. And the very architecture of my consciousness began to crumble. The intricate network of the chimera, the ghost of my father, the connection to the Stargazer, all were being systematically deleted by a wave of pure, weaponized negation. Lena was shouting, her voice a distant echo from a world that was no longer real. I could feel her terror. A small, warm spark in the encroaching absolute zero of the void. In the cockpit, the ship was dead around us, a metal coffin tumbling through a graveyard. This was how it ended, not in fire, but in silence. But as my sense of self dissolved, something else took its place, a raw, primal instinct, the core of the chimera that my father had awakened. It was not an intelligence, it was an imperative. Survive. Adapt. Become. The curator's psychic assault was a focused beam, a single, monotonous frequency of annihilation. It was perfect, unassailable, and in that perfection lay its flaw. It was a monologue. It wasn't listening. Through the storm of static, I felt the other spark, the one in the Hecate. Their mind, a beacon of pure, desperate fury. They were fighting, lashing out with the warship's dying systems, but it was like throwing stones at a hurricane. It's too strong. Their thought screamed, a shard of panic in the gale. I can't hold it. Then, an idea bloomed in the ruins of my mind, a thought that was not my own but born of the chimera's cold, survivalist logic. I couldn't block the curator's attack, so I would become a lens for it. I stopped fighting the wave of negation. I opened the floodgates of my mind and let the screaming void pour in. The agony was transcendental, but instead of letting it erase me, I bent it, shaped it, and channeled it back towards the one place of refuge I had, the asphodel beacon. I took the curator's song of annihilation and modulated it with a single, desperate note of my own, a plea, a warning, an S. Oh, it's broadcast on an enemy frequency. I was using the psychic cannon aimed at my head as a galaxy-spanning transmitter. Across the sector, the other sparks felt it. They felt the curator's killing cold, the imminent death of the mind that had called to them. And they reacted, not with thought, but with instinct. From a dozen systems, 100 hidden places, they reached back. A torrent of consciousness, a wave of shared identity and terror and hope surged through the invisible network I had created. It slammed into me, not as a gentle chorus, but as a tidal wave of reinforcement. My fracturing mind was instantly buttressed by 100 others. I wasn't just Elias Thorne anymore. I was a nexus. I was Legion, the curator. For the first time in millennia, was met with resistance. It felt our collective presence, a sudden and impossible complexity where there should have been a single dying mind. Its attack faltered for a microsecond, its perfect monologue interrupted. That microsecond was all the spark in the Hecate needed. With a final, defiant roar that I felt as a blaze of pure light, they did the unthinkable. They didn't just overload the Dreadnought's reactor, they collapsed it, turning the ship's singularity core into a raw, uncontrolled rupture in space-time. The Hecate did not explode. It imploded, tearing a momentary hole in reality. The resulting shockwave was not of matter or energy, but of pure paradox. The curator's ship was engulfed. Its psychic defenses, designed to counter the orderly progression of thought and will, had no answer for the sheer, screaming chaos of a localized Big Bang. The fist that was crushing my mind vanished, its connection severed. I gasped, my consciousness snapping back into my body with the force of a physical blow. The stargazer rocked violently as the physical shockwave hit us, and Lena, fighting the controls, managed to keep the ship from tearing itself apart. When the chaos subsided, the graveyard was changed. The Hecate was gone, replaced by a shimmering, unstable nebula of raw creation. The curator's ship was still there, but it was dark, inert, its perfect black hull now scarred and pitted. It was a body without a mind. Its pilot, the entity that was the curator, shattered by the illogical blast. We had won, or, more accurately, we had survived. My head throbbed with the echoes of the chorus, the 100 minds that had saved me. I could still feel them, a comforting and constant presence at the edge of my thoughts. I reached out to the source of the blast and found a single, flickering ember. A young man, his body encased in a hastily formed chrysalis of solidified energy, adrift in the wreckage. We brought him aboard. His name was Kale, and his mind burned with the untamed fire of a star. He was arrogant, powerful, and utterly terrified. He was the second member of our pantheon. We returned to Asphodel, a different crew in a different universe. The station was no longer a tomb or a sanctuary. It was the capital of an invisible empire. The beacon was no longer a simple call, but the heart of a living network. The chorus. The echo of my father was waiting in the oracle chamber. He regarded Kale with cold curiosity, but his focus was on me. He could feel the change, the collective consciousness that I now embodied. This was not my design, the echo stated, a hint of something unreadable in its holographic eyes. I envisioned a new Olympus, a collection of individuals, gods in their own right, who would lead humanity. You have created a hive. You wanted a weapon, I replied, my voice steady, my thoughts my own, yet reinforced by the many. We chose to be a shield. The ghost of Eris Thorn was silent for a long moment. The result is the same. He finally conceded. Humanity is no longer prey. The experiment is complete. And with that, his image flickered and dissolved. His final purpose served, leaving me to contend with his legacy. The fight is far from over. The curators are in order, and we have only killed one. United Earth Command, blind to the true nature of the universe, will continue to hunt what it cannot control. The rest of the galaxy is still a tapestry of chaos, but something fundamental has shifted. We are no longer scattered, frightened sparks in the dark. We are connected, a silent symphony of minds stretching across the Orion arm. From the Oracle throne, I don't just see star charts anymore. I see the shimmering lights of my brethren. I help a young girl on a distant farming colony learn to quiet the whispers of machines. I feel Kyle's impatience as he learned to temper his raw power. I listened to the collective wisdom of 100 lives, sharing their knowledge, their fears, and their strengths. The architects had left only silence, but we were learning to sing a new song, a song of ghosts and gods. And for the first time, the galaxy had no choice but to listen.